My name is Renee Thorne. I'm a Trinity grad, class of 99, and one of 3 co-chairs of the DC Women's Forum. The Women's Forum aims to engage alumni in active and meaningful ways in the life of the university and to provide opportunities for learning, leadership, and mentorship. In the DC region, having such a large and diverse database of alumni spread over 3 states, we have the unique ability to engage our alumni through a variety of programming and events. We pride ourselves on the ability to present programs such as this one that can't be replicated anywhere else. The number of participants registered for this program is evidence of the interest in this type of event, which highlights the often overlooked role of women in various segments of our society, the curiosity people have of that famous building at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, which is a lot harder to get into than it was when I was younger, and the desire to connect with fellow alum and experience their willingness to share their access to areas many of us may not experience otherwise. A special thank you to the David M. Rubenstein National Center for White House History for presenting this interesting program to our Duke community. The DC Women's Forum has a variety of programming we offer throughout the year. We will note some of our upcoming programming at the end of the presentation, and we encourage you to visit our website to see our upcoming programming, volunteer with Women's Forum, or find other ways to remain engaged with the larger Duke community. A special thank you to Kirsten Denny and Anna Pfeiffer, co-chairs of the Community Service and Entertainment/Cultural Outings Committee, for organizing this event. And I will now turn it over to Anna Pfeiffer for some opening remarks.
Thank you, Renee. Welcome to this evening's Duke DC Women's Forum event, celebrating women artists in the White House collection. This special program is sponsored by the David M. Rubenstein National Center for White House History, which serves as the research and educational center for the White House Historical Association. I'm Anna Gunnarsson Pfeiffer, class of 77, and a proud Duke parent, and I'm honored to introduce our 2 speakers for this evening. Our first speaker is Dr. Colleen Shogan, the Senior Vice President and Director of the David M. Rubenstein National Center for White House History. Dr. Shogan joined the White House Historical Association in 2020 following an exemplary 15-year career in federal government. She previously worked in the United States Senate and as a senior executive at the Library of Congress. Dr. Shogan is the vice chair of the Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission and currently teaches at Georgetown University. Her research focuses on the American presidency, women in politics, and Congress. She earned her BA in political science from Boston College and her PhD in American politics from Yale University. Our second presenter this evening is a White House historian, Sarah Fling. Sarah joined the White House Historical Association in 2019 as a history fellow and has previously held internships at Mount Vernon and the Frick and Historical Center in Pittsburgh. She graduated summa cum laude from the University of Pittsburgh in 2019 and received her MA in Public History from American University in 2021. She has studied art history and museum studies in Italy, Spain, and France. And her impressive young career, she has already visited 26 countries. Again, on behalf of Duke DC and the Duke community, we are so grateful to Colleen and Sarah for joining us this evening and sharing this special program highlighting the remarkable journey and history of women artists in the White House collection. Following Colleen's remarks and Sarah's presentation, we will have a moderated Q&A session for all of our participants. And now, welcome Colleen and Sarah.
Good evening. Thank you, Anna, for that kind introduction. Sarah and I are honored to join the Duke Women's Forum tonight. As Anna said, my name is Colleen Shogan. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the work we do before Sarah's excellent presentation. The Rubenstein Center offers comprehensive, authoritative, and accessible content about the history of the White House, including those who have lived and worked there, as well as its traditions and its complex role as a national symbol. The goal of the center is to promote awareness of the past, provide deeper historical appreciation and understanding, and inspire learning and engagement for learners of all ages. In more plain spoken terms, we are the educational department of the White House Historical Association with 3 different components. We have a K-12 education team who primarily works with teachers to provide classroom support materials related to the history of the White House, the presidency, and first ladies. We also have a digital librarian team who works on our digital library resource, which has over 20,000 images from the White House in its online collection. And last but not least, we have our historian team, of which Sarah is a member, who leads and conducts our historical research efforts. The center is named after David Rubenstein, I know a very proud Duke alum, who is one of our strongest and most generous donors at the White House Historical Association. Mr. Rubenstein is a terrific philanthropist when it comes to American history, and we're proud to have the name of our center attached to his work. We have 9 full-time staff members at the Rubenstein Center. Additionally, we run a robust fellowship and internship program. We're back into full swing this school year, and we have 3 graduate history fellows joining us this fall, mostly virtually, 2 from American University's Public History program, and 1 from Georgetown's History Department. We also have a K-12 education intern from American University, and we hope an NYU student in the spring will work with our digital library team on a new digital exhibit project concerning the history of fashion at the White House. It's worth noting that Sarah started the White House Historical Association as a history fellow with us, and we're proud to say she'll be joining us full-time as a public historian on October 1st. At the Rubenstein Center, we work hard to tell inclusive stories about the history of the White House. One of our signature research initiatives in this regard is Slavery in the President's Neighborhood research collection. The collection chronicles the history of slavery as related to the White House, including the enslaved people who built the White House and the enslaved people who worked at the White House. Sarah's presentation tonight on women artists in the White House collection is another effort in this vein to tell the complete story of the history of the White House and the people, both men and women, who have lived and worked there. We welcome you to explore our website, whitehousehistory.org. We have hundreds of articles available on the history of the White House, its traditions, its collections, the decisions that have been made there, the personalities who have inhabited it, and how it serves as a national symbol for American democracy. Please feel free to explore our images in our digital library, as well as our educational resources for teachers. I'm now going to turn it over to Sarah Fling for her wonderful presentation about women artists in the White House collection. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Colleen, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you all for joining me tonight. As Colleen mentioned, my presentation is going to be an overview of some of the amazing objects that we have in the White House collection, but it's by no means exhaustive. So feel free to ask questions along the way, and more information can be found on our website. Now let's head to the next slide to get started. I'd like to begin our exploration of the White House collection by really diving into its history. Now, the White House has a long history of collecting and displaying impressive fine and decorative arts pieces. But until the 1960s, there wasn't a designated caretaker of the White House and its amazing collection of sculpture, chinaware, furniture, and paintings. When President John Adams became the first president to live at the White House in 1800, the role that we know as a curator wasn't yet professionalized. And so as a result, various first ladies, hostesses, and White House staff members oversaw things like item inventories and the purchase and sale of furniture, things that are sort of under the wing of a curator today, but not yet then. Without protective protocol in place during the 19th and early 20th centuries, the White House was also plagued by theft and neglect, and many historic pieces were actually sold, damaged, or lost in this period. In fact, many saw White House objects as presidential relics and souvenirs instead of important historic artifacts that needed to be preserved for future generations. And I think that this engraving that you can see on the screen is a great example. It shows Union troops quartered in the East Room of the White House during the American Civil War in the 1860s. And during this period, we know that many actually took knives or scissors and cut off pieces of carpet or draperies and took it along with them as souvenirs of being at the Lincoln White House. Now we'll go to the next slide. Now, the process of acquisition and protection under the eye of a hired full-time curator didn't begin until the Kennedy administration, when First Lady and dedicated preservationist Jacqueline Kennedy ensured that the souvenir hunting and mismanagement of decades past would not be repeated. In 1961, the White House became an official museum, and it's protected by Congress. So since the 60s, any alterations to public spaces, if you've ever been to the White House, it's the part that you would see on a tour, must be approved by the federal government. In addition, Mrs. Kennedy hired Lorraine Waxman Pierce to be the first White House curator. She's pictured on the left-hand side here, accepting an addition to the White House collection. Now, in 1964, Lyndon B. Johnson signed Executive Order 1145, which officially established the office of the curator, as well as the Committee for the Preservation of the White House, which advises on acquisition projects. And I want to just mention that as we're on the topic of the White House curator, these are not political appointments. What you have in the White House curator's office is a group of dedicated museum professionals who have trained their entire lives as preservationists, and many of them stay for their entire careers. In fact, the current White House curator, Lydia Tederick, first joined the White House staff in 1979, and she's still there today. So these are lifelong positions, and people in the curator's office take so much pride in protecting this collection. Now to the next slide. Now, the White House collection has more than 65,000 objects, and some of them are stored on site at the White House, obviously on display and in the basement, while many of them are stored off-site in Maryland in what we would consider museum-grade storage. There's temperature controls and inventory lists to make sure they know exactly where everything is. Now, today, the protection of the collection is far more streamlined, and new additions to the collection are made in every administration. These acquisitions are spearheaded by the curator's office, who selects paintings and art based on historical and cultural significance. The White House Historical Association also assists with the acquisition of works, as well as the refurbishment and renovation of older pieces through donation. Now, the White House Curator's Office oversees the selection of works for display in the public areas of the White House, while the First Family has more leeway in deciding what they'd like to see on display in those private areas of the White House. That includes the upstairs residence, where they have private bedrooms and studies, as well as, more famously, the President's Oval Office. The curators can also request loans from major museums across the country if they want to get a piece they really have their eye on. And those include things like the Smithsonian, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. The First Ladies are often involved in this process of selecting works that they'd like to see in the White House or in acquiring works. So, for example, in this photograph, you see First Lady Laura Bush. She spearheaded the acquisition of this Jacob Lawrence painting called The Builders as part of her refurbishment of the Green Room in 2007. Next slide. Now I'd like to start by sharing the stories of a few female portraitists in the collection. So the White House has been collecting portraits of every president and first lady since the 1960s, and they are all represented in the collection today. So this photo here depicts the White House unveiling of the portrait of First Lady Bess Truman, which was painted by a woman, Greta Kemper, and we'll discuss her in a moment. But first, let's go to the next slide. I want to go chronologically, so I'll begin with Harriet A.S. Murphy, who was the first woman commissioned to paint the White House portrait of a president, which is extremely impressive. Harriet Murphy was a self-taught artist. She was born in England and transplanted to America as a young woman. She married another artist that she met when she came to America named William D. Murphy. And she found that when she was painting under her own name and trying to earn commissions, she wasn't getting as much money or as much recognition. But if she used her husband's signature, she made more commissions and more money. So you have this fabulous quote from the New York Times after she passed away that says, when Mr. Murphy, her husband, discovered that his wife's work was better than his own, he abandoned his own artwork and became her business agent. So the two of them sort of had this business of creating a great portrait business in the art world. And Harriet went on to paint over 1,000 portraits in her lifetime, including a number of prominent Americans, such as Presidents William McKinley, Theodore Roosevelt, and Woodrow Wilson. The portrait that, oh, can we go back a slide? Perfect. So the portrait that you see here is of William McKinley, and it was painted after his assassination using photographs and previous artistic portrayals. Now, this is a really interesting story because after McKinley's assassination, the White House actually held a competition to find an artist to paint his portrait. And Harriet Murphy beat 4 other male artists to win the commission. And when they found out that a woman had beat them out, they were, needless to say, not happy. It's also interesting because if you were able to turn this portrait around and look at the bottom corner, you would see that she did in fact enter the competition and sign the painting under her husband's name, continuing this trend of earning success by negotiating her husband's status. Now, Murphy's success as a painter is especially impressive because many women were actually excluded from the fine arts in the early 20th century. But as you'll see, let's go to the next slide. As the century went on, presidential portraits painted by women became more prevalent. So one of these women is Elizabeth Shumtov, who painted 2 American presidents and a first lady in her lifetime. Now, Shumtov has an interesting backstory. She was born in Russia, actually present-day Ukraine area, and took art lessons as a child. But her family permanently left the region following the October Revolution in 1917. Now, Shumtov and her family resettled in the United States, and she made a life for herself there. However, following the unexpected passing of her husband, she turned her artistic hobby into a full-time career to support herself and her family. Now, luckily, Shumtov was incredibly talented, and she became a well-known painter among high society New Yorkers. It was through these New York connections that Shumtov was first introduced to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. She first painted a miniature of him in 1943, and he liked it so much that he invited her back to Warm Springs, Georgia, 2 years later to paint a full portrait. Now, FDR sat for a watercolor portrait with Elizabeth Shumtov on April 12, 1945. If anybody in the audience is a presidential history buff, you'll know that that was a fateful day because in the middle of her painting session, Roosevelt suffered a fatal cerebral hemorrhage and died only a few hours later. Shumtov's incomplete portrait, seen here, still hangs at Warm Springs. And as you can see, she was only able to complete his head and really only the upper third of his body during their sitting. Now later, during the administration of Lyndon B. Johnson, the president invited Shumtov to complete a version of this portrait to hang in the White House. Johnson later commissioned Shumtov to paint both his official White House portrait and Lady Bird Johnson's portrait. And the reason for that is that LBJ really saw himself as he considered FDR to be his mentor and his political hero. And in many ways, he compared his Great Society program to FDR's New Deal. And so he loved the idea of having this connection between the two of them by sharing a portraitist. So if we go to the next slide, you'll get to see these portraits. Now, the portrait of Roosevelt seen on the left was painted by Shumtov from memory based on her original unfinished portrait of FDR. And the paintings of the Johnsons were completed via in-person sittings at the White House and at their Texas ranch. Now we'll go to the next slide. Now we're going to return to Greta Kemper, who you saw at the beginning with the portrait of Bess Truman. Now, similar to the artists we've talked about, Greta Kemper was also an immigrant who made a name for herself in the United States as an artist. She was born in Austria in 1903, and she began painting at a young age, as so many of these other female portraitists did. After she moved to the United States, she studied art in New York City and made a name for herself by painting the portraits of many prominent individuals, including President Harry S. Truman, who commissioned Kemper to paint his portrait in 1947. What's interesting is that for the rest of Greta Kempton's career, she served as sort of a court painter for the Truman family. She painted Bess Truman, Harry S. Truman, and their daughter Margaret. And she even turned down offers to paint other US presidents and their family members out of loyalty to the Trumans. Now, in particular, Kempton's likeness of Truman is perhaps one of the most popular, and I'm sure in this picture you recognize it, because it was later used for official campaign posters, for commemorative postage stamps and coins. It's really one of the best known depictions that we have of President Truman. Next slide, please. Now, the last portraitist that I'd like to explore today is Henrietta Wyatt, who was really, in my opinion, a woman that was born to be an artist. It was in her genetics, because she was the daughter of prominent 20th century illustrator N.C. Wyatt. And she and her siblings were taught art from a very young age. It was really ingrained into their childhood. And in fact, her brother Andrew also became a very well-known painter. Now, what's interesting here is that Wyatt contracted polio as a child when she was just 3 years old, and she often discussed how polio had left her hands mangled. However, she was still a child prodigy artist, and she studied art in Massachusetts and Pennsylvania and became well known for her portraits and their sensitive, mysterious style. Now, in 1978, Wyatt painted the official White House portrait of First Lady Pat Nixon. And the cool tone portrait that you see here is interesting because it first features a white hibiscus flower, which you can see in the bottom corner. And this was meant to be a nod to Mrs. Nixon's love of gardening. And a lot of these portraits, you see little touches that are personal to the person they're depicting. Now, you can also see in this portrait that Mrs. Nixon's expression is really soft, and it earns some criticism from viewers who, the American public at the time, often nicknamed her Plastic Pat. And a lot of people considered that this portrait sort of channeled that feeling that Mrs. Nixon was lifeless, not personable, not similar to some of the other first ladies that had surrounded her time in the White House. But Wyatt argued that it really characterized her private, introspective, intelligent personality. Mrs. Nixon sat for Wyatt at the White House and at her California home. And it's just a great example of that mysterious style that Wyatt painted in. Next slide, please. So now we're going to move on from portraitists to expand our view of the White House collection to include women sculptors and painters. And I think that a few of these, some of you in the audience will be familiar with. Next slide. So we'll start with Mary Cassatt, who was a prominent 19th and 20th century painter and the only American artist included in the French School of Impressionists. So Cassatt exhibited her work alongside artists like Degas, Monet, and Renoir in Paris, despite having very humble Pennsylvania upbringing. And she popularized the Impressionist style among American audiences when she returned to the United States from exhibiting her work in Paris and did exhibitions here. She was one of the few successful artists of this period, like Murphy, and was known for her depictions of domestic life, motherhood, and children in particular. Now, Cassatt has one work in the White House collection, and it's titled Young Mother and Two Children, and it came to the White House during the Lyndon B. Johnson administration. Now, we'll go to the next slide so we can see it. You can see it on the left-hand side here. It's very characteristic of a Cassatt painting, not only because of that feminine, family-based subject matter, but also because of the cool tones and impressionist style. But I also had to include this amazing photograph of President Johnson's daughter, Linda Bird, and his granddaughter, Lucinda Robb, which is taken in front of Cassatt's painting in 1968. I think that the photograph is such a great reminder of the duality of the White House, that the White House serves as both this amazing museum that has seen so much history and is really for the people, but it's also the home to a family. And so this in situ photograph, I think, just really tugs at the heartstrings. We'll go to the next slide. And we'll discuss Georgia O'Keeffe, who's another well-known painter, a modernist that's featured in the White House collection, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with O'Keeffe's works. Now, in particular, O'Keeffe is known for her depictions of flowers and of New Mexico landscapes. She lived in New Mexico for much of her life and really considered the desert and the really intriguing dry bones and landscape of New Mexico to be a muse. So both of these subject matters, flowers and New Mexico, have been featured in the White House. Next slide. During the George W. Bush administration, O'Keeffe's floral painting, which you see on the left-hand side here, Jimson Weed White Flower #1, came to the White House on loan, and it hung in the president's dining room, which is where it's pictured here. Now, the White House also has an O'Keeffe painting in the permanent collection, the one that you see on the right, which is titled Mountain at Bear Lake Taos, and it was painted by Georgia O'Keeffe in 1930 and acquired by the White House during the Clinton administration in 1997. Next slide. The painting depicts land near Taos, New Mexico, and this is a sacred area to the Taos indigenous people of the area. Georgia O'Keeffe employs shifting light, deep colors, and abstract outlines to show the beauty of the desert in this painting. And you can see it here hanging above the fireplace in the White House Library. Next slide. Next, we're going to talk about one of my absolute favorites, Alma Thomas, who is the first Black woman represented in the White House collection. Now, Alma Thomas is a Washington, D.C. local. She was the first fine arts graduate of Howard University in 1924, and she spent most of her life teaching art in Washington, D.C. public schools. It wasn't until the 1960s, when Alma Thomas actually retired from her day job, that she began painting and became a well-known painter. By the time that she became really recognizable as an artist, she was actually in her 70s, which is just absolutely amazing. Now, Thomas was a part of the Washington, D.C. Color School, which was a group of abstract expressionists at the time who was in particular known for their work with very colorful abstract shapes. And on the next slide, you will see the work that she has at the White House, which is her 1966 painting, Resurrection. This came to the White House during the administration of Barack Obama. It was a Black History Month unveiling, and it hung in the family dining room. And as you can see here, it is just such a pop of color. And this is exactly how Alma Thomas loved to paint: abstract shapes and these beautiful, beautiful color palettes. Next slide, please. And now we're going to switch gears a little bit to talk about a fascinating woman sculptor who's featured in the White House collection, named Adeline Johnson. Now, a lot of these artists I've mentioned have had really interesting backstories, but I have to be honest, I think that Adeline Johnson's is the most fascinating. So Johnson was born in Illinois in 1859. She trained as an artist and a woodworker in St. Louis. And as a young woman, she decided that she wanted to pursue her dreams of being an artist at the Chicago School of Art. So she moved to Chicago, ready to enroll in classes, but a freak pickpocketing incident robbed her of her tuition money. So she decided, you know, I don't have the money to go to school anymore. This dream has to be put on hold for now. Well, later, another freak incident saved her career. She fell down an empty elevator shaft, and the insurance settlement for that accident provided $15,000, which she used to study art in Europe. Now, Johnson returned to the United States after learning and getting her education in Rome. And when she came back in the 1880s, she became a proud supporter of women's suffrage. She sculpted a number of prominent American suffragists, which is what she's best known for. And if you've ever been to the US Capitol Rotunda, you've actually seen her most famous work, which is titled Portrait Monument to Lucretia Mott, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Susan B. Anthony. Now, the bronze bust that you see pictured here on the screen is of Susan B. Anthony, and it's a part of the White House collection. Now, Adeline Johnson really is such an eccentric example of an artist. When she got married, her bridesmaids were a group of sculpted busts of suffragists that she made. And later in her life, she always lied about her age and told people that she was 100. And when she died, it came out that she was actually only in her 80s and that she had been fibbing just for fun. So we'll go to the next slide. Now, the last portion of my talk today is that I want to highlight one of my own favorite topics, which is the First Ladies. And a number of First Ladies were artists, art collectors, and art lovers. So I'm going to share some of their stories with you all today as important White House residents in their own right. So next slide, please. Now, we'll begin with Harriet Lane, who was a White House hostess and the niece of President James Buchanan. Now, when Harriet Lane moved into the White House in 1857, she was a popular, youthful First Lady. It's very interesting because today, you know, James Buchanan is, I would say, considered one of the least popular presidents. Not many people know much about him, but Harriet Lane was a celebrity in her own right when she moved into the White House. And she was also an art collector. So she began collecting art while she lived at the White House and continued for the rest of her life. So after the Buchanan administration ended, Harriet Lane traveled Europe and dedicated her time and energy to visiting museums and galleries and amassing this collection of art. When she died in 1903, she decided to will her entire collection toward the creation of, quote, a national gallery of art. Now, if any of you have been to Washington, D.C., you know that now there is a National Gallery of Art that's located on the National Mall. But at this time, when Harriet Lane died, no such institution existed. So instead, her collection of art and artifacts was given to the Smithsonian Institution. Now, Lane's collection of paintings, sculptures, and Buchanan artifacts became the foundation and the impetus for the creation of the Smithsonian American Art Museum. So let's go to the next slide so you can see a photo of her collection. The Smithsonian lovingly refers to Harriet Lane as First Lady of the National Collection of Fine Arts, and some of her art is pictured here in 1922 in the Harriet Lane Johnston Room. So let's go to the next slide. So next we have Caroline Harrison, the wife of President Benjamin Harrison, who was incredibly artistic. One of the first ladies we'll talk about that really was super driven to be an artist. She studied art and music in school, and she took lessons in Indianapolis, Indiana as an adult woman. In her Indiana home, she also gave her own art lessons and established a personal studio. She also exhibited her work in local Indianapolis exhibitions. Now, when the Harrisons moved into the White House in 1889, Caroline Harrison continued her love of art. She took lessons at the White House and invited congressional and cabinet wives to come join her in those lessons. In fact, Caroline Harrison was so passionate about art that she proposed the addition of a new wing on the White House to house an American art gallery. Unfortunately, it was a very expensive project and Congress said no. Let's go to the next slide. Here you can see a piece of art by Mrs. Harrison. She loved watercolors, china painting, and florals. And this photograph shows a tea set that was painted by Mrs. Harrison in 1891. Now, this tea set features orchids, which were her favorite flower. And at the time when the Harrisons lived in the White House, there was a large White House conservatory, an indoor garden, where she spent a lot of time getting inspiration for her own artwork. Mrs. Harrison even helped to design the Harrison White House China Service. Next slide, please. Here you can see a mahogany box which held Mrs. Harrison's watercolor supplies. It's a fabulous artifact of the First Ladies that's at the President Benjamin Harrison presidential site. And on the right-hand side, you can see a sketch of Mrs. Harrison's proposed White House expansion, which would include that American Art Gallery wing. Now, for obvious reasons, this didn't happen, not only for the price that you can imagine, but it's certainly palatial. Looks like it's better fit for kings than an American president, but I think it's fascinating to imagine what the White House would be like if it had this. Next slide, please. Now, when Ellen Wilson moved into the White House in 1913, she was the only and first lady to be a professional artist, meaning that she was the first to actually sell her work for a profit. Mrs. Wilson attended art school in her home state of Georgia and later in New York City. And as a teenager, she exhibited her work internationally at the Paris International Exposition, for which she won a bronze medal. Pretty impressive. Ellen Wilson later exhibited her works a number of times, including being featured at one-woman art shows. She also interestingly lived in artist colonies for a time in the American Northeast. Now, when Mrs. Wilson's husband, Woodrow Wilson, was elected, she set up an art studio in the attic of the White House, and she continued to sell her paintings for a profit. But as First Lady, she didn't feel that it was right to keep the profits from her artwork. So instead, she donated the money to the Martha Berry School for Girls in Rome, Georgia. It was a school for underprivileged girls. Now, I love this quote. which says that Mrs. Wilson has a high talent as a landscape painter, not the kind of thing that goes with a few well-decorated china plates, but a real big artist talent. And it wasn't intentional, I don't think, but it certainly draws a direct connection between Caroline Harrison, who considered herself to be an artist, but really stuck to those china paintings, versus Mrs. Wilson, who's exhibiting and selling her artwork for a profit. Next slide, please. Now we'll see one of Mrs. Wilson's works, which is this Princeton Landscape. It depicts the environment in Princeton, New Jersey, where the Wilsons lived before they moved to the White House. And it's very representative of Mrs. Wilson's art style. She was an impressionist, and so she focused her work around landscapes and natural scenes. This is also perfect for fall, which I'm sure many of us are ready to enjoy. Now, many other First Ladies have supported the arts throughout the history of the White House, bringing music, theater, ballet, and fine arts to the executive mansion, assisting with the acquisition of works in the White House collection, and encouraging art appreciation in the United States. Now, for my last slide, let's go to the next one. I would be remiss not to mention one of the most iconic examples of First Ladies encouraging art appreciation. During the Kennedy administration, Mrs. Kennedy requested that the Mona Lisa, one of the most iconic works in the Louvre Museum and of course in the world, come to the United States. Now, Mrs. Kennedy was a Francophile. She had studied abroad in Paris when she was in college at George Washington University here in Washington, D.C., and of course loved art as a result. So she wanted to share this iconic painting exhibited in France with American audiences. Now, Mrs. Kennedy successfully persuaded the French Minister of Cultural Affairs, André Malraux, who you see pictured here. But the idea was highly unpopular to many French citizens and art critics, as you can imagine. They were concerned about transporting such a fragile and important work across the Atlantic Ocean. Now, this painting had actually only left France once before, and it was after it was stolen and smuggled out into Italy. Still, Mrs. Kennedy used her classic charm to convince the minister that sharing the Mona Lisa with with American audiences would be a symbol of French and American alliances, a great diplomatic move, as well as sharing culture with the nation. So in December 1962, the Mona Lisa was transported via temperature-controlled ship across the Atlantic Ocean. It was protected by armed guards on its way to Washington, D.C., and exhibited at the National Gallery of Art. It later moved to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. And in that short period between December 1962 and March 1963, between 1.5 and 2 million visitors saw the painting. In so many ways, Mrs. Kennedy improved American art appreciation, and she worked tirelessly to preserve the White House and its collections by creating the Office of the Curator and by making the White House a protected museum. We're celebrating her legacy this year. It's the 60th anniversary of the White House Historical Association, which was founded by Mrs. Kennedy. So let's go to the final slide to say thank you so much for your attention, and I will now take any questions that you might have.
One second here.
No problem. I know sometimes it takes a bit to get it off the screen.
Yeah, this is Kirsten Denny, and I think, hang on one second. I can't, sorry, a little bit of a technical trying to make myself show up, but you'll just have to see my little box at the top. We'll leave you there, Sarah. So anyhow, hi everyone, my name is Kirsten Denny, class of 84, and a huge thank you, Sarah, for your presentation. When we were planning our fall activity, we finally realized, we're like, COVID or not, virtual or not, this was an incredibly rare opportunity to view and learn something about art that we otherwise might not ever have a chance to see. So thank you so much for that view into the White House and the art, and really a tremendous thank you for bringing the artists and the history behind the artwork to life. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
So I'm sure that we have got a number of folks out there who have questions. Because there are so many folks, we'll ask people to go ahead and post their questions to the chat box, and we'll get through as many as we can. The invite said that this presentation would end at 8. But Sarah and Colleen have agreed to stay on a little bit longer. So we will wrap up by 8:15 at the latest, but we can run ahead a little bit if we need to. Let's see, right, and then we will wrap up then with a few closing remarks. So Are there any questions currently for Colleen and or Sarah? And while we wait, I could go ahead and ask one. This is sort of, we put heads together, and I think this is a little bit interesting too. Were there any artistic presidents?
Yes, it's a great question. So there have been a number of artistic presidents, much like the First Ladies. A few great examples include Ulysses S. Grant enjoyed sketching and drawing while he was a student at West Point. We're not sure that that love of drawing continued into his presidency, but you still can find sketches if you go on to National Park Service websites for the Ulysses Grant Historic Site. They have a great example of his sketch work. Another great example, of course, is Dwight D. Eisenhower, who loved painting. He painted throughout his life and during his time at the White House. In fact, he gave his own artwork as gifts to some White House staff members. Jimmy Carter enjoyed painting in his post-presidency, and he's published a book of his artwork, as well as George W. Bush, who of course very recently published some of his artwork in a book. So there are a number of artistic presidents.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yes.
Well, we have a question from Pamela. Which administration was the most supportive of having women artists represented in the collection?
Great question, Pamela. You know, I think that as the White House has become more modern and in more recent years, more and more women have joined the White House collection. I can't necessarily point to a single administration that actively brought in the most, but it has definitely been something more recent. And it also brings up a great point, which is that to be included in the White House collection, the artist has to have been deceased for more than 25 years, which is why for a long time, there were many women who were not represented just because for so much of history, women were not represented in the field of creating art. But it's a great question.
Okay, thank you. And Margaret just posted one. With 65,000 objects, how often are they displayed at the White House? And can they, I guess the rest of them, be seen somewhere else, and or do they rotate around? Yeah,
that's actually a fantastic question. So out of the 65,000 objects, obviously so many of those thousands are offsite in storage. And it's important to note that the reason that the number is so big is because a lot of that is tableware, pieces of silverware, plates, cups from those White House china collections that really make up a large chunk of that number. But you're right that they do rotate some things out. Of course, the primary state floor rooms, as I said, are protected by Congress, and those pieces generally stay where they are. Just because people don't visit the White House frequently. Normally, a person might have one chance in their life to tour the White House, so they keep things that are really popular on display all the time. That being said, you can see some of the pieces in other places. We have a White House Visitors Center in Washington, D.C., where there are some pieces from the White House collection. You can see digital versions of them on our website, of course, which I encourage you to check out if you'd like to see a close-up of any of those. But pieces from the White House also occasionally go into museums for traveling exhibitions. I think the best example is that this past fall at the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C., they did an exhibit of First Lady portraits. And so a number of portraits from the White House collection were on display there for the public. So you just have to sort of keep an eye out and see what's happening in Washington, D.C., and you can catch some of those pieces in other places.
Super. Annabelle asked, which First Lady was the most active in terms of acquisitions?
Well, it's certainly got to be Mrs. Kennedy. Jacqueline Kennedy was just so passionate about collecting for the White House. And in particular, she realized that because there had been no curator until she was in charge of this White House collection, that there were many pieces, as I mentioned, that had been lost, auctioned off, or removed from the White House. So during her time in the White House, she made a point to try to discover pieces that had originally been in the White House during old administrations and to bring them back. On top of that, she also started this movement to get as many portraits of previous presidents and first ladies in the White House as possible, so that there was a representation of every former president and first lady in the collection. So that was a lot of acquisitions work to try to find these likenesses. Today, the White House officially commissions these portraits of the president and first lady as they're leaving their administration. But at the time, she was really trying to scramble around to find different places that had portraits or photographs or some sort of likeness of those former presidents and first ladies. So certainly Mrs. Kennedy.
And so she was a real driver. What about when first ladies come in or first families come in who don't have a strong art background, how does a curator work with them to figure out what they want to display in the public and private spaces?
Definitely, you know, that's a great point, is that not everybody that comes in is that driven by preservation, but certainly all of the first ladies that have moved in have some appreciation for the fact that they're living in a home that is a museum and that is the people's house. It's their home only for a short time, but it will always be home to the American people. So in that case, the curator's office works with them to see, you know, what are your tastes? What do you like to, do you like modern art? Do you like the traditional old masters? So they can talk to them about what they like to see, but also part of selecting artworks for the White House is to represent what your presidential administration means. So a good example of that is the Obama White House. They brought in many contemporary artists as well as diverse artists, which was really representative of Obama's message of hope and building a new future, bringing in these more contemporary versions of art compared to these older traditional works that had been in the collection, as well as diversifying the White House to properly reflect the American dream and how art has changed throughout American history. It can also just represent sort of what political leanings you have. You can have busts of previous political heroes, whatever president you most resonate with, you might hang them in the Oval Office. So even if you aren't necessarily an art buff, you can base it around your own personality and your own inclinations while you're living there.
Okay, super. Must be a cool job. Let's see, so Fred asked, did the French ambassador ask to borrow any of art, any American masterpieces?
You know, that is a fabulous question. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure, but I will say that the best part of this Kennedy story is really that there was so much hesitation in this. So deals were certainly made, negotiations at dinners and events with the foreign minister. Mrs. Kennedy really employed the charm so that she could get this work to the United States, because you're right, it is a big ask. And so there has to be some give and take on something like that. But I can't tell it right off the top of my head. I can look more into it for you, Fred.
Thank you. And I skipped, I think, a couple at the top. One question, is it possible to view the collection online?
Yeah, fabulous question. Yeah, so at whitehousehistory.org, we have a digital library where you can see pieces from the White House collection. It's a great digital resource. You can see them in rooms at the White House as well as the individual pieces. So I highly, highly recommend checking out our website if you want to get a closer look. And many of these objects, oh, thanks, Colleen dropped it in the chat so you can get to it easily. And a lot of these works also, we have more research on them on the website. So full-length articles or more in-depth information than I was able to give today.
Okay, super. And then Jane asked where we could see some more of Ellen Wilson's work.
Oh, yes. Great question. So alongside the one that we have in our digital library to see there, the Woodrow Wilson House in Washington, D.C., I know has a collection of them. They have exhibited a number of Mrs. Wilson's works in the past. And I do believe they also have a Google Arts and Culture exhibit online of Mrs. Wilson's work. I'll see if I can find it and get you the link so that we can share that with everybody, because she has a number of great works. And any other place where you might find a Woodrow Wilson birth site, there's one in Virginia, is likely to have some connection to Mrs. Wilson's work. So I would encourage you to check them out there.
Okay. Valerie asks, when will activities celebrating the 60th anniversary be published?
Oh, great. So we've already started some of our celebrations over the summer, but we have things going on all year long. On our website, you can find links to events that we're doing. But also when it's not the anniversary, we do lots of online virtual events as well as in-person events. We have an event coming up next Tuesday, White House History Live. We do them once a month. So if you're interested in attending more, I encourage you to check out our events page on our website, because there's definitely lots of opportunity to learn more about the 60th anniversary as well as the other research initiatives that we have.
Okay. How about this? Do either you or Colleen have a favorite piece of art in the collection?
Colleen,
put you on the spot.
to begin.
I don't know. I mean, that's a tough question. I really like Alma Thomas's Resurrection. So actually, I just purchased a replica of Resurrection, a print of Resurrection, and hung it in my office at the White House Historical Association, because I think it does for my office exactly what it did in the family dining room in the White House, which is bring just this breath of fresh air and color into it. We work in a very old house on Lafayette Square, Decatur House, which is over 200 years old. And there's a lot of great things about working in an old house like that, but it is, on dark days, it's very dark. And that's just how houses were built. And despite, any electric light that you put into it. And I just feel as though when I added that print of Alma Thomas's Resurrection, it just brings the whole room to life, and it makes me happy every time I look at it. So, that would probably have to be the favorite piece that's in the collection for me.
I was also going to say the Alma Thomas piece. I think all of us at WHHA are big Alma Thomas fans, but I'll also mention what I think is a great piece with a great backstory, as well as probably the most famous piece in the White House collection, which is Gilbert Stuart's full-length portrait of George Washington. It's one of the oldest pieces in the White House because it was originally painted in 1800, and it's one of the few pieces that survived the fire at the White House in 1814, when British troops during the War of 1812 burned the White House to the ground, including the furnishings inside. But luckily, First Lady Dolly Madison ordered that the painting be taken off the wall, and an enslaved servant, as well as 2 white servants at the White House, ensured its safety. And it survives to this day and hangs in the East Room. So it's just got a great story that tells so much about the makeup of the White House, both in the past and the love of George Washington that continues to this day.
Awesome. You mentioned George Bush, the Clintons, the Obamas. What about the Trumps and the Bidens? What new acquisitions have their administrations brought?
Sure. So during the Trump administration, we had the acquisition of the Isamu Noguchi floor frame sculpture, which is now in the Rose Garden. It was unveiled last year. It's a great piece of artwork, and Noguchi is the first Asian American artist to be featured in the White House collection. So that was really exciting to add that. During the Trump administration, there was also a major refurbishment done on the Blue Room Belanger set of chairs, a historical pair of chairs that were falling into disrepair, and a major renovation was done. So now they're looking spick and span. There haven't been any new acquisitions yet that I know of at the Biden White House. Typically, acquisitions take years, so it's pretty quick for them to have been able to acquire anything yet. But as I said, they are pretty constant during every administration, so I'm sure that we'll see some from the Biden White House as well.
All right. And Victoria has a question going back to the portraits. Is who decides who's going to paint the portraits? Is it a presidential preference, or how does that happen?
Oh, yeah. So for the portraits, the artist is selected by the president and first lady as they are leaving the White House. So they have the say in who they want to pick, which is how you see these sort of relationships between some presidents having the same portraitist as another, or that family connection between Martha Kempton and the Truman family. So they get to select who their portraitist will be, especially because they do spend a lot of time together, weeks and weeks of sitting for that portrait. So they choose based on their artistic style, but also I think based on their personality and how they get along with them.
Oh, cool. All right, let's see. Jan, I remember going to see the Mona Lisa at the National Gallery when I was 10 years old. Glad to hear the story behind it.
Oh, how exciting. That's awesome.
Yes. And Pamela says, if anyone is interested, Alma Thomas has an exhibit currently on display at the Chrysler Museum in Norfolk, Virginia.
Yes, I should plug that next week is the anniversary of Alma Thomas's birthday. So there's a ton of events going on for her in the upcoming month. So if you're an Alma Thomas fan, now is your time.
The National Gallery of Art is holding events, right, Sarah? And
the Phillips collection also. The National Museum of Women in the Arts is doing an event. A lot of people. So yeah, if you want to learn more about Alma Thomas, you have many opportunities upcoming.
Cool. Here's an interesting one. Did the curators ever, from Margaret, do the curators ever reject something that the First Lady or the President wants to acquire? It's like poor taste or not being noteworthy or otherwise?
You know, that's an interesting question. I'm trying to think if there would, certainly, as I had mentioned, there is that rule that the artist has to be deceased more than 25 years in order to come into the permanent collection. So if they don't follow that guideline, then it would certainly be rejected. But for bringing something into the White House, it's not based on really being noteworthy so much as it is being culturally significant. So there are many works where you can see the artist's name and you'll say, I've never heard of that person. They might not even have very much biographical information, but if it's a piece that's really reflective of artwork at that time or of sort of the American art canon, then it'll end up in the collection. So it would be interesting though. I think maybe those conversations are ones had behind closed doors that maybe we're not privy to.
I would imagine so. Let's see if I'm just checking to see if I've missed any questions. Let's see. Yeah, I think, let me see if we did get a head start on the questions, so we might not run too much over. I think that wraps up our questions. Anyone else? Would anyone else like to throw out a question? I'm getting some thank yous for sure.
I also love the sharing of information in the chat that's going on. It's very helpful. I'm enjoying the crowdsourcing.
Yeah, definitely some very engaged folks, which is wonderful. And I think I've asked most of the questions that we've come up on. Anyone else? All right, then really, I guess since we're approaching the top of the hour anyhow. So on behalf of everyone on this presentation who's joined us, and on behalf of the DC Women's Forum, we really want to thank you so much for this presentation. Let's see. And then making yourselves available. I realize it's time in your evening, so thank you very much for that. It's been just very educational and enjoyable. As Sarah said, you can find more information, and Colleen has a link in here too for the whitehousehistory.org. And I'll throw a plug in that when I was on there, I was poking around and I found a link that let me do my own little virtual tour of the public spaces of the White House, which I thought was very cool.
Yes.
That was something we built during the pandemic. We're really proud of it. So that's the first ever 360 tour of the White House that we've been able to put together. And we'll give you a little sneak preview. Starting in mid-October, we're going to change that tour into a Halloween scavenger hunt. So we're going to put little markers all throughout the White House, and we're going to have little nuggets about the history of Halloween at the White House, maybe some ghost stories. So it's anybody can do the activity, but it's suited for kids. And we will have a Google form that you can fill out after you've done the scavenger hunt, and we will be giving away some White House history prizes to some lucky winners. We did this for the Easter egg roll. It was very successful, and we're really looking forward to doing it for Halloween.
Oh, great. That sounds like fun. So yeah, so a huge thank you to both of you from everyone. I've just got a last little piece of business. And I think Stephen, we can see what Stephen just wrote, which is really just for the women in DC to make sure that you're aware of our upcoming series of neighborhood conversations. The first one is in Bethesda on Thursday, October 7th, followed by Bowie on Tuesday, October 12th, and McLean, Virginia on Wednesday, October 20th. And Louise, yeah, Louise just dropped a link into the chat box if anyone wants to capture that, but there'll also be emails out there. So keep your eyes peeled for other opportunities to mix and mingle with Duke gals. So thank you again, Sarah and Colleen. We appreciate it so much. Thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. We were so pleased to see so many people jump on, and have a wonderful rest of the evening.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.